Good evening, fam. Mr. Mark 60 coming to you once again. Hardcore truth, unedited, unfiltered, straight no chaser. Speaking on issues of spirituality, economics, topics like history, religion, education, entertainment, labor, and law, as Neely Fuller and Dr. Francis Cress Welsing often quoted. And I hope I don't ramble, but I got a lot on my mind right now, and I wanted to bring uh, to the family some thoughts on what's going on today, namely the issue of 1921, uh, the Oklahoma massacre, I would call it, the racial tragedy that took place in Oklahoma City on what was known as Black Wall Street. I couldn't help thinking about why now. Whenever I see the white media, the white government, the white power structure appear to give attention to any of our concerns, my antenna immediately goes up. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think in terms of victimization. I don't see myself as a victim of racism, white supremacy, though many of us could legitimately take that title. I prefer not to. I prefer to see myself as a victor. When I run into situations where I do feel discriminated against, racially assaulted, I deal with that situation right then and there as an individual. And I think that at this stage of our history, this is probably the only way this is going to handle or be handled one individual at a time. For as you see, as a group, we are being annihilated in all kinds of microaggressive ways in this society. And so the powers that be have always and will always be hell bent on keeping us from uniting as a country, as a community, as a healthy, functioning subset of society. We have been, throughout this history, shown the door every time we have approached success as a community. We have been shown the door every time we have sought to work with this, I hate to say it, this white power structure, these demons that insist on assaulting a community of people that they either fear, hate, or both. So my question was, why is Joe Biden and his administration focusing on Black Wall Street now? I don't think that they're interested in our comeuppance. I don't think that they're interested in our economic empowerment or economic position. That has never been their intent. That has never been their desire. And the fear has always been competition in the marketplace. You see, in my view, we were never meant to compete. When they brought or made, let me put it this way, many of our people slaves on some of those plantations, and not all of us were slaves. We know now that not every white person had a slave. No white person had enough money to have a slave. So we can't blame the entire white population at that time for holding black people in place. So we need to look at a power structure that had the money, the ability, and the resource to do it. But at that time, not all of us were under the thumb of some white power structure, individually or collectively. But those of us that were kept in a position where we could not function as an intact family unit. However, even under those conditions, some of the belief systems, some of the cultural mores were somehow held in place as if we were an intact family. so that even when we got off those plantations and had what we would call semi freedom and had the opportunity, we took the opportunity to build our own communities. However, the white population that surrounded Black Wall Street got jealous. They have always been jealous. And they sought, with the government's help, to destroy our community based on a trumped up lie. It's been on TV. Most of you have seen the videos and have seen the history. It's known now. I've always known it because I did some reading years and years ago about Black Wall Street. I've always been interested in the history of our community. Power, independence, free will, and intellect have never been an issue for our community since coming off those plantations. We came to those plantations with skills from wherever it is they brought us, whether it was from across the water or whether it was the indigenous people who were black and born in this nation before the white man got here. That's another issue that needs to be talked about. Many of us were not brought from anywhere. Our families were born here. Let me continue. So again, why now? And while I was thinking about why now, I came across something that interested me. And I thought you might be interested to know. How many of you have heard the term 40 acres and a mule? How many of you know just how close we came to economic parity and prosperity? Well, there was a book I found called 100 Amazing Facts About the Negro with Complete Proof. And it's by Joel Rogers. It's a book written in 1934. This particular amazing fact is amazing fact number 13, according to the book. And it's called What Happened to the 40 Acres and a Mule That Former Slaves Were Promised. Listen to this. We've all heard the story of the 40 acres and a mule. That promise that was made to former slaves. It's a staple of Black history lessons, and it's the name of Spike Lee's film company. The promise was the first systemic attempt to provide a form of reparations to newly freed slaves, and it was astonishingly radical for its time, proto-socialist in its implications. In fact, such a policy would be radical in any country today. The federal government's massive confiscation of private property, some 400,000 acres, formerly owned by Confederate landowners, and its methodical redistribution to former black slaves. Revolutionary idea. So, what most of us haven't heard is that the idea really was generated by the black leaders themselves. Listen to this. This is how it went. It is difficult to stress inadequately or adequately how revolutionary this idea was. As the historian Eric Foner puts it in his book, Reconstruction, America's Unfinished Revolution, 1863 to 1877, he says, here in coastal South Carolina and Georgia, the prospect beckoned of a transformation of Southern society more radical even than the end of slavery. He says, try to imagine how profoundly different the history of race relations in the United States would have had to been had this policy been implemented and enforced. Had the former slaves actually had access to the ownership of land and of property, if they had had a chance to be self-sufficient economically, to build, accrue, and pass on wealth. Imagine what we would be here and where we would be today. After all, one of the principal promises of America was the possibility of average people being able to own land and all that such ownership entailed. As we know all too well, this promise was not to be realized for the overwhelming majority of the nation's former slaves. So, what exactly was promised? We've been taught in school that the source of the policy of 40 acres and a mule was Union General William T. Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15, issued on January 16, 1865. That account is half right. Sherman prescribed the 40 acres in that order, but not the mule. The mule would come later. But what many accounts leave out is that this idea for massive land redistribution actually was the result of a discussion that Sherman and Secretary of War Edwin Stanton held 4 days before Sherman issued the order, with 20 leaders of the black community in Savannah, Georgia, where Sherman was headquartered following his famous March to the Sea. The meeting was unprecedented in American history. Today, we commonly use the phrase 40 acres and a mule, but few of us have read the order itself. 3 of its parts are relevant here. Section 1 bears repeating in full. It reads like this: the islands from Charleston, South Carolina, the abandoned rice fields along the rivers for 30 miles back from the sea, and the country bordering the St. Johns River, Florida, are reserved and set apart for the settlement of the Negroes, now made free by the acts of war and the proclamation of the President of the United States. This is a lot of territory because it goes from South Carolina all the way over to Florida and even through Georgia, I believe. Yes. Section 2 specifies that these new communities, moreover, would be governed entirely by black people themselves. On the islands and in the settlements hereafter to be established, no white person whatever, unless military officers and soldiers detailed for duty, will be permitted to reside, couldn't even live there, and the sole and exclusive management of affairs will be left to the freed people themselves. By the laws of war and orders of the President of the United States, the Negro is free and must be dealt with as such. Come on, somebody. Finally, Section 3 specifies the allocation of the land. It says, each family shall have a plot not more than 40 acres of tillable ground, and when it borders on some water channel, with not more than 800 feet waterfront, in the possession of which land the military authorities will afford them protection until such time as they can protect themselves, or until Congress shall regulate their title. Look at this. They had the army protecting us. And I'll just say as an aside, the same army that was ordered to protect was the same government that went ahead and allowed Wall Street to be destroyed. They even helped. Let me keep going. See, if they can give it to you, they can take it from you. And I'm going to comment on that prospect in a second. With this order, 400,000 acres of land, a strip of coastline stretching from Charleston, South Carolina, to the St. Johns River in Florida, including Georgia's Sea Islands and the mainland 30 miles in from the coast. As Barton Myers reports, this would be redistributed to the newly freed slaves. The extent of this order and its larger implications are mind-boggling. So, who came up with the idea? Well, according to this, here's how this radical proposal, which must have completely blown the minds of the rebel Confederates, actually came about. The abolitionists Charles Sumner and Thaddeus Stevens and other radical Republicans had been actively advocating land distribution to break the back of Southern slaveholders' powers, as Myers observed. But Sherman's plan only took shape after the meeting he and Stanton held with those black ministers at 8 p.m. January 12th on the second floor of Charles Greene's mansion on Savannah's Macon Street. In its broadest strokes, 40 acres and a mule was their idea. Stanton, aware of the great historical significance of this meeting, presented Henry Ward Beecher, Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous brother, a verbatim transcript of the discussion, which Beecher read to his congregation at New York's Plymouth Church and which the New York Daily Tribune printed in full in its February 13, 1865 edition. Stanton told Beecher that for the first time in the history of this nation, the representatives of the government had gone to these poor, debased people to ask them what they wanted for themselves. Stanton had suggested to Sherman that they gather the leaders of the Negro community and ask them something no one else had apparently thought to ask. He asked them, "What do you want for your own people following the war?" And what they wanted astonishes us even today, because it was smart. Who were these 20 thoughtful leaders who exhibited such foresight? Talking about the black leaders now. They were all ministers, mostly Baptists and Methodists. Most curious of all to me, says the writer, is that 11 of the 20 had been born free enslaved states. Free enslaved states, of which 10 lived as free men in the Confederacy during the course of the Civil War. Not everybody was a slave. The other one, a man named James Lynch, was born free in Maryland, a slave state, and had only moved to the South 2 years before. The other 9 ministers had been slaves in the South who became contraband and hence free, only because of the Emancipation Proclamation when Union forces liberated them. Their chosen leader and spokesman was a Baptist minister named Garrison Frazier, age 67, who had been born in Granville, North Carolina, and was a slave until 1857. When he purchased freedom for himself and wife for $1,000 in gold and silver. As the New York Daily Tribune reported, Reverend Frazier had been in the ministry for 35 years, and it was he who bore the responsibility of answering the 12 questions that Sherman and Stanton put to the group. The stakes for the future of the Negro group were high. And Frazier and his brothers did not disappoint. What they tell Sherman and Stanton that the Negro most wanted, or rather, what did they tell Sherman and Stanton that the Negro most wanted? And their answer was land. They said, the way we can best take care of ourselves, Reverend Frazier began his answer to the crucial third question, is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor, and we can soon maintain ourselves and have something to spare. We want to be placed on land until we are able to buy it and make it our own. And when asked next where the freed slaves would rather live, whether scattered among the whites or in colonies by themselves, without missing a beat, Brother Frazier, as the transcript calls him, replied, "I would prefer to live by ourselves, but there is a prejudice against us in the South that will take years to get over." When polled individually around the table, all but one, James Lynch, 26, the man who had moved from Baltimore, said that they agreed with Frazier. 4 days later, Sherman issued Special Field Order Number 15 after President Lincoln approved it. So, what became of the land that was promised? Where did this go? This is what happened. As you can imagine, the response to the order was immediate in both the white and black community, from the north to the south. When the transcript of the meeting was reprinted in the black publication Christian Reorder or Recorder, an editorial note intoned that from this it will be seen that the colored people down south are not so dumb as many would suppose them to be, reflecting north to south, slave to free, black class tensions that continued well into the modern civil rights movement to this day. The effect throughout the South was electric. As Eric Foner explains, the freedmen hastened to take advantage of the order. Baptist minister Ulysses Houston, one of the group that had met with Sherman, led 1,000 blacks to Skidway Island, Georgia, where they established a self-governing community with Houston as the black governor. And by June, 40,000 freedmen had been settled on 400,000 acres of Sherman land. By the way, Sherman later ordered that the army could lend the new settlers mules, hence the phrase 40 acres and a mule. And what happened to this astonishingly visionary program, which would have fundamentally altered the course of American race relations? Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, and a sympathizer with the South, overturned the order in the fall of 1865, and as Barton Myers sadly concludes, returned the land along the South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida coast to the planters who had originally owned it, to the very people who had declared war on the United States. Talk about group economics. Tell me they don't act like a band of savages, but they act as one when their interests are involved. So my question is always, if this happened then, and then you look at 1921, every time we build communities for ourselves and just want to be left alone, they cannot leave us be. What is it? What is it about our social structure that we work so hard to establish that threatens the white power structure? I've heard all the theories, and so have many of you probably. There is either hatred or fear or both among some in this white supremacist system. As Neely Fuller puts it, not every person who is white establishes or rather practices white supremacy, but many do. And the ones that do have enough resource and power to affect a person's life chances. As a group, individually, we have come a long way. As a group, we have not. We do not have a community. We are not even, by definition, should be called a community. There are too many broken families. There's too much violence still in parts of our community. There are too many class distinctions. And so we are not all on the same page. We have been divided. And we don't know how to build a community within all of the classes. That's what we need to deal with. And we can't expect to solve this problem of family division, community upheaval, or the lack thereof, by expecting the very people who have historically destroyed our community to now come and help us build it. That's not going to happen. And I wish we would stop trying to look for others to do for us that which only we can do for ourselves. Yes, we must start as individuals because that's the way we've been divided. However, individuals make up a functional community, but individuals must first become functional. Again, what is supposed to come out of all the attention paid to Oklahoma City 1921? All who look at this video, I'll let you comment. You tell me what you think this is all about. America and this government have never been interested in our uplift, our economic prosperity, advancement. As I told you earlier, it's all about economics and the competition that we provided. And that's the reason that we are not allowed by all kinds of machinations in this society to get economic parity. We have to fight for it every single day, but we can only do it as individuals because that's how powerful the forces have worked against us. Don't let it stop you as an individual. Fine. Work with the hand that you've been dealt, but work with it. Use it. Stack your paper. Take care of your families. Become men and women and form that most powerful of institutions called the family. That's where we begin. We can talk about strategies. We can talk about whatever needs to be talked about to get that accomplished. But as a group, it's not going to happen. It happens at the individual level, and then the group forms. Once we all get on similar code, as Neely Fuller would put it. We need to get a code. Not someone else's code, our code. So why all the conversation about our historical devastation? If you asked me, it's one more way for white society to feel guilty, yet not do anything to change their behavior. I don't need more press about how victimized this community has been over the last 100, 200, 300 years. I don't need to be reminded of that. True, if you're going to really talk about the history, then talk about all of it. The prosperity, the strength, the unity. Talk about all of it. Teach in your schools there. I don't care what you do with it. This information is information that we should be teaching our own children. We don't need the government to bring this up. This should have been brought up in our own families. This history should have been known by our own people. Yet I'm sure that many of you know nothing about this history. It's been out there. We have no excuse for not reading. And why am I saying that this is something that they should not be bringing up? Because like I told you earlier, they love being in the position of teaching, of handing, of giving, of feeding. Whatever it is they feel they want to give, hand, or feed you. The same hand that feeds you is the same hand that can starve you. That's my problem with anything this power structure pretends to do for this community. It's a lie, it's a distortion, and I do not trust the intent. This is our history. We need to be talking about it amongst ourselves. That's my point. It needs to come off the TV. We don't need to teach white people anything. If they want to learn, they can go read. We need to be teaching ourselves. We need to be informing ourselves. We need to be talking to each other. I am tired of other people defining our reality. That's the problem with this. I'm going to create another video on this topic and several others to come behind it because I think this is something that needs to be talked about along with my other videos on spirituality. Of course, you know where I stand on that. But I had to get this in because I'm always suspicious of the popular media and this government when they start focusing their attention on us and our concerns and our history. They start defining the narrative. And that's not something anybody else but ourselves should be doing. Until next time, just some thoughts on what's going on today. I'm Mr. Mark 60. Until we meet again, be at peace, take care of yourselves, prosper. Talk to you soon.